one of the things, and again, you did bring up a good point regarding RFK. Definitely agree with you, especially regarding the Israel lobby. There's no question that that's where the lion's share of his funding has come from, and that's why he has, stood on ceremony when it comes to what's going on in Gaza right now. But one thing that he did bring up as an independent candidate, which I think is very important, is the control that private equity has, especially over housing in this country. And it seems to be a crisis that has been growing exponentially. I happen to work in commercial real estate. I see it all the time. People cannot afford to purchase a home, especially people that are in the, again, post 1980. If you're living in the millennial and Gen Z generations in particular, the ability to have a job or a career for that matter and be able to afford a home and build generational wealth is almost non-existent for most. So where do you stand on the likes of, let's say, private equity regarding BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and their ability to basically have no regulation on them whatsoever and buy up all the single-family homes that they can get their hands on in this country and render basically an entire renter class for multiple generations, which I see as being one of the key economic issues of our time that isn't really being addressed?
Yeah, well, I've been addressing that since 2017. And by the way, RFK knows nothing about this issue. He's never had to suffer. You're looking at when I came to the United States, we lived in a home, in a rental property where we couldn't even get heat. We had to put coal into it. So you have to understand these people bring up issues just to point out Booby effing Kennedy. And that's what he is. He's a fake anti-establishment, and it needs to be addressed because the reason change does not take place is because the swarm creates these fake people who talk about issues, but have no real solutions. Now, when you look at the housing crisis and you look at all of these issues, innovation, it's been the consolidation of power that has taken place, power, profit, and control since 1970. And the policies that have taken place, and that not only affects housing, has been a policy of centralization in all of these areas. And you can even just look, in 2020, what took place. 600 billionaires increased their wealth by $2.3 trillion. During these lockdowns. Kennedy supported lockdowns. Trump supported lockdowns. $16 trillion, went by the wayside. But the fundamental issue is that since 1970 till today, there's been massive consolidation of power. And what we need to talk about is how do we change that? So you have to have a little bit of understanding of history. So if you go back to the late 1800s, the United States and the working people of this country led some of the most powerful labor movements. It was in 1886 that the Haymarket riots took place. Yeah. And during those riots, 4 American workers were hanged. And none of this everyday people learn anymore. And it was in the 1920s, women led these massive militant movements starting in Lowell, Massachusetts here, because they wanted to organize labor. And those bottoms-up movements are the ones that enabled solutions to what we're talking about, housing, right? Ending child labor. All these things came from mass movements, which put the fear of God into people like the Kennedys, into people like the Roosevelts, Republicans and Democrats. So in reaction to those movements, what did the swarm do, the establishment? They did 2 things. First of all, they created the McCarthy era, right? Which went after people trying to brand anyone who was trying to build these bottoms-up movements as quote unquote being controlled by communists in Russia. But in fact, the organic movement of the American people is one of the most vibrant political movements. So between 1900 to 1970, if you look at that block, as these movements grew, as we had very powerful movements, 11,000 strikes, close to 200 million participating in these strikes, all wages in every income quartile grew. That's when, America was known. That's why my parents came here in 1970, right? Because you could buy a home. It was affordable, all those things. But it was these mass labor movements. After 1970, something very powerful took place. The swarm, the elites knew, shit, we don't want people organizing bottoms up. So they did 2 things. The bottoms up trade unions were taken over by the Democrats. The Republicans branded all these bottoms up movements as right wing or left wing communists. So the left and the right colluded. So between 1970 till today, if you look at the dynamics, there's been maybe 2 million people participating in about 900 strikes. So as the labor movement waned, right, we have had a massive transfer of about $47 trillion.
Yeah, no, I mean, we address labor all the time on this show.
We, really?
We
okay.
We cover labor quite a bit. That's one of our big things. And we also walk picket lines. So, that's something we cover a lot. But what does that look like in terms of policy? So, for example, I support the PRO Act. I think that we need to get rid of right to work states. There's definitely things that need to be done for that. But yeah, I mean, like,
Well,
so what's the policy for that?
So Jen, what we've done is our position is the following, okay? It has been, as an activist since 1980, it is movements, actual bottoms-up movements that fundamentally change things. Without that force, the policies have no teeth to them. When I was growing up in New Jersey, if you wanted to change something, your teacher would say, oh, go write to your congressman, right? Or go run for office or file this lawsuit. But all of those things don't have any teeth without a movement. So what we've done is we've built a global movement, Truth, Freedom, Health. And that movement, number one, educates people on the importance of building bottoms-up movements, the dynamics of that. And then to the extent that you engage in electoral legal politics, you have to have this movement. So everything we do is to engage people to learn this dynamic and then get on the ground. So for example, collecting signatures is a real expression of that activism, right? You go out and collect signatures, a police show up to try to tell you you can't collect signatures, right? And then you have to understand the law and you have to essentially flex your muscles as a citizen. So in our view, all of these issues, nothing is substantially going to happen until these mass bottoms-up movements are recreated. That's why you talked about generational wealth, right? You talked about why immigrants came here fundamentally. It was because of this, and it's a dot that needs to be connected, which people don't want to connect. They want to make it liberal populism. So you don't want to give power to people. So that's the fundamental nature of what we're doing. So everything we do is about, we drive people back to build these movements. So, an eclipse is taking place, right?
Right.
The eclipse is going to solve something. Some magical thinking is going to happen, and somehow Zionism is going to end, or we're going to all be freed because some event is going to take place. And this fundamental understanding is what we're bringing into the electoral politics, that none of these people, Trump, Booby, Kennedy, Sanders, all these people were created fundamentally post 1950s, 60s. It was a real active part of creating what we call the not so obvious establishment, people running for politics, to enable people to think these people who know nothing about the lives of everyday people, are going to solve things. They don't know the lives of growing up in a discriminatory world.
I mean, this sounds like to me like a really good educational campaign, and I appreciate that. But I see the need to educate people because that's what we do here. I mean, that's the whole point of what I'm doing. And so I recognize that. But at the end of the day, when you're running for president, people want to hear this is the policy we're going to do. And that is just the way it is, because otherwise it makes for really good PAC, it makes for really good educational opportunities. But why run for president? Like, what is it that you're trying to do, as president?
Do you see yourself actually getting on, a substantial amount of ballots?
Yeah.
That's also the big question.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're asking the wrong questions. You're asking the wrong questions because you're assuming that change comes by a Booby Kennedy doing something.
No, I'm not assuming that at all.
Because you said it's just educational. So you haven't.
Well, that's what you appear to every time we ask a policy. You just tell me that you're out there educating people, and I think that's amazing. I'm just saying, if you're running,
well, no, that's not what I said.
What is the presidential run for?
You were deconstructing my words into something else.
Okay.
Education is very important. If you don't think education is important, that's the reason we're in this situation. Because people.
No, I know it's important. That's why I do this podcast.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
So in each one of these areas, there's 6 areas. Each one of those areas has very particular platforms. Okay, so healthcare, environment, all of those, not only particular platforms, detailed platforms, not just gee whiz things, but our platforms are based on the individual participating in them. Not saying it's going to be a top-down solution. So I'm not sure what you mean by a platform. It seems
what I mean is, do you support single-payer healthcare?
Something that happens top-down.
Well, right. No. I understand. I am all about the outside-in movement, but at the end of the day,
you seem to think a platform, it comes from top-down. That it doesn't come from bottoms up.
No, I don't think that. But what I'm asking you is do you support single payer healthcare?
I told you what I support. I don't support that policy. What I support is a policy of DCP. Okay, it's a very different model.
Okay.
So the problem is people think you have to be pro-climate, anti-climate. So you have to wake up to the fact that when new blood comes in, we're going to have a very different view. And you have to open your mind to that. And if you're unwilling to do that, then it's just about keeping the playing field in the world of the existing swarm. Oh, Booby said this, Trump said this. Every one of their platforms is being defined by the same people who want to keep things as they are. So you have to expand your understanding.
Yeah.
And that understanding is every one of these issues has a root cause. So when you look at healthcare, let's get to the root cause. Why
Yeah.
is the lifespan of the American people going down? Why?
Well, we've covered it on our show for the
it
past
doesn't
3.5
matter.
years.
Tell me why it's going down.
Well,
Why is the
there's a
lifespan
lot
going
of
like
different
this?
there's a lot of variables, but we're poisoning ourselves. We're corporate bought. We have politicians that are owned by big pharma that profit off of it. I mean, there's a lot of variables.
It's a
We've been doing
multi-system.
we've been covering a lot of these issues over the past 3.5 years.
That's fine. But you have me on here to talk about it. You can cover all these issues, but we're having a conversation right now. The issue is it's a multi-systems issue. And when you uncover that, you find out that the reason this has been happening is because a set of people who've been involved in this have been into the centralization of healthcare. It has been big pharma, which has a reductionist medical model. There is not any intention to educate people on how to take care of their health. The medical doctor, the family practitioner, cannot even go and practice family practicing. They have to go join hospitals. By the time they come out of medical school, they have about a $500,000 loan, right? So there's a number of systemic issues that need to change. For example, in healthcare, one of our policies is you need to eliminate the need for for someone to become a medical doctor to go to undergraduate. Many countries, you go right from high school to a 5 or 6 year program. The second thing is we have to support DPCs, which is the doctor can directly serve medicine, not the concierge model. And then you have to enable people to make it much easier for people to get the crisis care. So it's a very different.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do you support even if you don't support the single payer model, do you support the removal of private insurance and basically defanging big pharma?
That's exactly what we're saying. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So fundamentally, there's this movement that's coming from the medical community to do that, where you can doctors are saying, I don't want to deal with insurance. Pay me $75 a month out of pocket. I mean, that was the old school days, right? Go back to 1970s to see your doctor. You paid him $50. He knew you, your family. It was a much better healthcare model, right? The doctor didn't spend 15 minutes. So we've essentially degenerated that. But fundamentally, that's what it is. But it's a systemic problem from the time someone decides to go to medical school. So they're coming off with massive amount of loans. So most doctors are being forced to join large hospitals. The other piece here is, independent of that, if you do go to a hospital, one of our policies that we've talked about for nearly 8 years is GPOs and PBMs. I'm sure you guys know who those are, right?
I don't know what that is.
Well, if you want to talk about healthcare and you don't know about GPOs and PBMs, it's like the issue. So group purchasing organizations and PBMs in the 1970s were created, which allowed legalized corruption. So two arms here. Group purchasing, if you go to a hospital, everything in that hospital goes through 3 major GPOs. Now in the 70s, let's say the 3 of us owned our own hospital, we were each buying pillowcases or bedpans or insulin, right? Paying X. So we outsourced our buying purchase to what was called a group purchaser. So all of us pooled all the things we wanted and you get a better deal, okay? Well, those GPOs by 2000 were given the rights to give kickbacks to hospital administrators. It's got legalized by Congress.
Well, that's what everybody talks about regarding if there is one specific entity within the healthcare sphere that is the most corrupted at this point, it is definitely the hospital system. There's no question.
No, it's the GPOs. It's the
GPOs that have essentially corporate captured the hospital system.
Right,
you
but
walk
they
into
have
a hospital
become.
And they make you pay $30 for an Advil. It's things like
right.
that.
And so what they've also done is, so the 3 major GPOs in the last 3 years merged with the 3 major insurance companies. So now you have total opacity of costs. So and they have the right to give kickbacks to hospital administrators. That should be made illegal.
It should absolutely be illegal.
And same with PBM. So I'm giving you very specific policies here. PBMs do the same thing on the drug side. This is why the cost of drugs is so high. So we have massive opacity in the healthcare system, which needs to be eliminated. We have the fact that the medical, one of the other policies is eliminate the need to go to, undergraduate. You should be able to go right from high school, maybe 1 year right to medical school. You reduce the cost on a medical student.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this before we wrap, because I think this is important. And hang on 1 second, because that's
the element. That's how it sounds. He's going to pick up Graham. It's what the element sounds like. It's a 2003 Honda Element.
So, Doc,
what is it?
Last question, because we do have to wrap. We have seen one so far, and I assume there will be others. But in terms of independent party candidates, or at least candidates that are running outside of the 2-party duopoly, are doing debates. Are you going to be participating in any type of presidential debates coming up that we should know about so that more and more people will hear your message?
Yeah, the issue is, do they want us to invite us to any debates? You say, even if we get the visibility on the ballot, as you know, there's 4 levels of election fraud in the United States. First is who even gets visibility. Even if you overcome that, then they restrict you on getting ballot access. Okay. Then the third is debates. And the fourth is if you even win all their elections, like happened in Massachusetts, then they manipulate the machines. So we're the ones who've exposed 4 of those things, and we're exposing the 5th one right now, the whole ballot access issue. So it's really a question to be asked more broadly to the American people. Now, there has to be a new model of conducting debates, you see, that takes it out of independent journalists should be able to conduct debates, and call people into them like you guys. Because it's 4 major media companies or 3 who control these debates.
It should go back to the League of Women Voters.
Yeah,
that was when it was better.
That was a model but it should be like many League of Women Voters.